and good morning, and welcome to today's webinar. This is our third event at TC. My name is Amani Al-Khayat, and I'm the host for this webinar. I'm also the president of Intelligent Reality in Education. I'm thrilled to have you join us for a great and insightful, thought-provoking discussion today. Intelligent Reality in Education is a student organization, and it's inspired by, actually, the name is inspired by IEEE Intelligent Reality intersection. And this name actually focused on the seamless integration of artificial intelligence in terms of how it makes actual reality, the literal world around us, including ethic, how this world can be more intelligent and responsive to our needs as educators, students, and researchers. So the name that they proposed was Intelligent Reality, but our focus is on education. So it's my honor today to introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Chris Deedy. And Dr. Chris Deedy is a distinguished scholar in the area of education, and he is the hold on, sorry. Dr. Chris Deedy is a senior research fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and in the field of emerging technology, policy, and leadership in education. His extensive contributions include serving as chair of the AHGSE Department of Teaching, Learning, being named a fellow of the American Educational Research Association, and leading numerous initiatives at the National Science Foundation. Dr. Deedy has been instrumental in shaping global educational technology strategies, including his work with the OECD 2030 scientific committees. And Dr. Deedy is the co-editor of several ground-breaking books, such as Virtual, Augmented, and Mixed Realities in Education, the 60-Year Curriculum, New Models of Lifelong Learning in the Digital Economy. His work continues to inspire educators, researchers, and policy makers worldwide. And so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing here. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Christopher Deedy to the stage. And so we are so excited to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and for giving me the chance to share ideas. This is a very interesting time in the evolution of educational technology. So I'm going to share my screen. So a little background about myself and AI. Over half a century ago, when I was a graduate student, I read the very first article on AI in education in a scholarly journal. And the author of that article confidently predicted that by the end of the 1970s, we wouldn't need teachers anymore. Well, you can see that that forecast wasn't very accurate. And since then, I've lived through 9 hype cycles of AI in education. About every 5 years, enough progress is made that the optimists declare that we're going to have digital deities, and the pessimists say that the Terminator is going to come for us. And they've been wrong all of the past 9 hype cycles, and they're also wrong in this hype cycle connected with GenAI, even though GenAI is a bigger leap than many of the other hype cycles have been. So you're going to get a balanced perspective from me that's based on a knowledge of the history of AI that I think is going to be more appropriate and accurate than either extreme in terms of optimism or pessimism. And in particular, I want to talk about promises and perils for learning and try to use some metaphors as a way to illustrate that. So what is this advance that people are so excited about? Why are large language models seen by many, including by me, as a breakthrough? I mean, I'm the Associate Director for Research of the National AI Institute on Adult Learning and Online Education, so I certainly spend a lot of my time thinking about this. And the breakthrough is that for 75 years, AI has been trying to solve the natural language processing problem so that you could talk to a machine in the same way that you might talk to another human being with all of the kinds of shortcuts and idioms and complex expressions that we use as part of language. And the machine would respond appropriately, that you wouldn't have to learn a programming language to interact with a machine. You wouldn't have to use forced choices on the screen, none of which probably reflect exactly what you would want to say, and so on. And I'm using words carefully here when I say the machine would respond appropriately, because I do not mean that the machine would understand what you said or comprehend what you said. In that way, it's very different than another human being might be. It's instead, the machine is able to process what it doesn't understand and use neural nets to answer in a way that is responsive. And I'll explain later more about the strengths and the limits of that. But it does work well in terms of interacting with everyday language and being able to respond in a way that is deals with the issues that the language was about. So why am I hedging so much about this, and why am I concerned that people are overly optimistic about what natural language processing means? Well, we are wired as human beings to treat language as if there was intelligence behind it. And you can see why this is an advantage in terms of evolution. When you're born as an infant, around you, you hear language, and you are wired to go through perhaps the most complex learning experience you'll ever have in your life, which is to not only listen to this language, but begin to make sense out of what's going on and begin to generate language yourself. But that wiring means that things that generate language are seen as intelligent, even when they're not. And an example of this also happened when I was a graduate student in the 1960s. An MIT professor, Joseph Weizenbaum, who was an AI specialist at that time and a natural language specialist, did a little demonstration by writing a program called ELIZA. ELIZA was named after Eliza Doolittle in Pygmalion, and the what ELIZA did was to mimic a therapist, in particular, a therapist in the style of Carl Rogers, who in the 60s was a big influence in therapy. And Rogerian therapy meant that you repeated back to the patient what you heard. So you'd go to see a therapist, you'd say, I had a rough day today, and the therapist would say, I hear that your day was quite difficult. And you would say, I really hate my boss. You just can't get anywhere working with him. And the therapist would say, I hear that your boss is part of the problem. And every once in a while, the therapist might say something like, how do you feel about your mother? So it came across a little bit more like therapy. And Weizenbaum did this just by using a bag of tricks, not even AI. He just used pattern recognition and pattern matching, crude programming to show that this could, with a particular kind of interaction, mimic and make people think that they were actually talking to something that was smart and that comprehended what they were saying, which of course it didn't. And what happened surprised Weizenbaum. He even wrote a book about it, because people would spend hours and hours talking to Eliza, including his own secretary, and thinking that they were getting back therapeutic advice, when in fact, Eliza didn't understand anything at all about what they were saying. So that led to an understanding of what's called the Eliza effect, which is that we assume that there's intelligence behind language production. But in the case of artificial intelligence, GenAI, that's only true to a very limited extent. It's intelligent in terms of responding appropriately in a way that Eliza, in a much more narrow context, was able to respond appropriately. But it's not accurate in terms of talking about understanding or comprehension or any of the things that we would attribute to human intelligence. So with that limit, natural language processing is changing a lot of things in the world because it gives us a way of interacting naturally with machines. And in particular, people are looking at how Gen AI and AI in general are changing what's called the division of labor by economists, the part of work that's done by people and the part of work that's done by machines. This is an example of one of many forecasts that different kinds of consulting firms are doing to illustrate which professions are going to be affected by Gen AI, and in those professions, how you would have an AI partner for what you're doing that would change the nature of your work. Now, I wouldn't pay too much attention to the details of the forecast because what history has shown us is that typically these forecasts are wrong in the details. But the list of roles occupationally that is affected is pretty accurate. And that is really staggering compared to our past expectations about AI and how much it was going to change the workplace. A lot more professions are now affected by Gen AI. So how are they affected? Well, intelligence can be parsed into two roles, judgment and reckoning. And you see this in science fiction. Science fiction has been wrestling with AI for a long time, trying to imagine what would happen. Some of you may be fans of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and if so, you'll recognize the wise human, Captain Picard, who runs the starship, and Data, who looks like a person but is in fact a machine, an android, who is an AI. And Data provides Captain Picard with calculative predictions, reckoning, and then Captain Picard uses his judgment to run the starship well, practical wisdom. A non-fictional example of that is that illustrates this division of occupational role is with oncologists, doctors who treat cancer, because increasingly they have AI assistants that do reckoning for them. And the AI assistant can do things that no human being can do. It can scan 1,500 online medical journals every morning looking for something that might apply to the treatment of a particular patient. It can scan huge numbers of online patient records online every morning, looking for things that might give insights into the treatment that's being proposed and what's going to happen to the patient. But you would never want the AI counseling the patient about what to do and choose treatment options because the AI doesn't understand a huge number of things that are part of judgment, that some people value quality of life and others value quantity, that there is such a thing as pain and there is such a thing as death, and that people have personal beliefs and cultural beliefs about death. The choice of treatment affects family circumstances, and people may have a family. The choice of treatment affects spiritual beliefs and cultural beliefs, and the patient has those. None of that is understood by the reckoning device. So you always want Data working for Picard, and you always want the AI working for the human being. But the advantage is, first, that the machines can handle more data and can reckon more deeply than human beings. But even more important, they free up the human being to focus more on judgment and decision making. And an example of that comes out of the institute that I'm the associate director of research for, which is helping teachers of adults to be more effective. So we're building tools that are AI partners that, again, are narrow and do reckoning. They can tutor different kinds of content for students who are falling behind. They can answer the questions that students ask that they wouldn't be asking if they only read the instructions, but students never do. They can help run laboratories. They can help with library studies. There's even a social assistant that can help people in a large online course find good learning partners for them. And so taking my own case, I can be surrounded by these different kinds of AI partners in my work with adult learning. And I can either be de-skilled by them or I can upskill for them. So if I just let them take over parts of my job and I don't do anything different, I'm de-skilled. And in fact, I end up sort of working for them, where the question answering teaching assistant says, well, I can't answer this question, you have to do it. But if I upskill, then I can use judgment to move beyond what they're doing and to more deeply understand my students' cultural backgrounds and their personal goals, and to, in general, to personalize instruction and give my learners more voice and choice. So intelligence augmentation, IA, is what happens when a human being and an AI work together in partnership and each does what it does well. But you only get the augmentation if people upskill. If they just use the AI but don't take advantage of the extra time, then there isn't this kind of positive effect. And the reason that people are thinking the division of labor is shifting and so many jobs are going to be affected is because of this idea that the humans will be able to do much more in these AI partnerships, and intelligence augmentation will reshape what professionals in many different areas are able to do. So if it only works when people upskill, how are we doing on that? Well, the answer is we're doing very badly, because we measure our educational systems by how well people do on high stakes tests. So even Harvard, you need to do well on a test like the SAT or the GRE or the Gaokao in order to get into Harvard. And then when you graduate, you want to take the LSAT for getting into law school, or a test to get into med school, or some other kind of high stakes measure. And those are all reckoning. They're all based on learning reckoning. So we're teaching people more and more reckoning to lose to AI, which is better at reckoning than we are. And we're not teaching judgment, which is what we need to be teaching so that we can upskill to get the benefit of intelligence augmentation. How important is this? It's really important because we are facing a very difficult time. In 2020, I co-edited a book about new models for lifelong learning. And one of the themes in the book was that we're entering an extraordinarily difficult period, turbulent, disruptive, chaotic, that's going to last for decades. And so in our lifelong learning, we don't need to just keep adding to our knowledge. We need to really think very carefully about our beliefs and our dispositions, because those are going to be very important in determining how we handle all this chaos and disruption. Now, since the book was written, we've had the COVID pandemic, we've had GenAI, and we now have this incredible political chaos that's starting up worldwide. So the forecast about the need in lifelong learning for these judgment kinds of skills was very accurate, and we ignore this at our peril. So we don't have time, given that this is just an hour, to have a discussion at this point. But one of the things that you might reflect on, and you'll have access to this PowerPoint afterwards, is when you think about learning in general and learning with GenAI in particular, how much of it is learning to do reckoning, duplicating AI? and how much of it is learning to do judgment, complementing AI? And then a second question would be, to what extent is AI being used to help people with their beliefs and their dispositions and their socio cultural abilities, as opposed to just helping them with test taking and with generating narrow skills and with generating narrow knowledge? Because we're using AI in a way to stay with the industrial revolution at a time when we need to be thinking towards a totally different kind of world. So if you're curious about intelligence augmentation, there's a free report online that I co-authored about this. And if you're curious about how we might teach judgment instead of reckoning, what would that look like, that kind of education? There's another report that I co-authored that deals with that. And I'll just speak a little bit about what's in that second report. So the key insight in terms of AI and learning is that the destination is the journey. So in teaching, we ask people for a lot of destinations. We say, produce a proxy that shows that you've learned, produce an essay, produce a doctoral dissertation, produce a symphony, produce a computer program, produce a painting. And those proxies are used to say, well, if the person could do this, then they must have learned how to do this. But that's only true if you take the journey to get to that destination. The proxy isn't what's important, it's the journey that's important. And with GenAI, you have something that can take the journey for you, if you will. It can produce the proxy without your producing the journey. And that's disastrous. That's disastrous in terms of learning. So people are saying, well, why really learn to write anymore? GenAI can do the writing, and I can just learn how to prompt engineers so that I can, do a good job of editing the writing. Well, writing is taking your own original thoughts and organizing them and finding a way to communicate them to others and making them interesting and compelling. If AI does the writing, it's its thoughts, it's not your thoughts. So it's fundamentally misunderstanding what you should be doing to learn, which is to never let anything do your thinking for you. Never let another person do your thinking for you. That's plagiarism. But never let an AI do your thinking for you, because then you're just cheating yourself. And I'm very troubled by people getting all excited about the fact that you can take a document and do a podcast from it, as if the AI was intelligently able to figure out what the really important part of the document was. Or I see surveys where students are saying, what do I like about AI? I like the fact that I've got this complicated thing that I'm trying to understand. And when I ask AI, I get a clear, concise, simple answer. Well, if you're studying something complicated, a clear, concise, simple answer is a wrong answer. It's a wrong answer. I remember when I was growing up, there was something called Cliff's Notes. This was pre-digital. You didn't have to read a novel. You just went to Cliff's Notes and it gave you a 2-page outline of the novel. And you could pass some kind of a test on the novel, but you hadn't read it, so you didn't actually get any of the benefit out of the novel. That's what we see happening with AI, and students and even teachers are not necessarily understanding that's about and why it's of value. So where can AI be used well if we don't let it take the journey for us? One way in which it can be used well is learning by acquisition. Another way is learning by participation. And a third is learning by knowledge creation. And just briefly, to summarize something that's covered in detail in that report, most of education is learning by acquisition. That's teaching by telling and learning by listening is a big part of what's going on. And when people say, well, AI can do tutoring, what they mean is AI can do learning by acquisition. The National Institute that I'm part of is building these tools that I talked about earlier, AI-powered assistants to create IA for teachers of adults. And this involves helping the teachers to be more effective at learning by acquisition, and then using AI at the back end to look at the kinds of outputs that learners are producing, both their process of learning and their proxies of learning, and feeding that back into making the tools and the teachers even more effective. And an example of that is a tool called SMART. So SMART, you're trying to learn something complicated. Say it's in biology, and the teacher asks you to write a one-page explanation of this complicated thing. SMART will not write the explanation for you. It's not going to short-circuit the journey, but it will help the teacher evaluate what you've written, and it will provide feedback on the extent to which you were successful in discussing this complicated thing. Now, I remember pre-digital, when I would give students assignments and I'd get a stack of papers, the first thing I'd have to do is spend 20 minutes each doing spelling and grammar checking on the papers. And now, once things became digital and there was something else to do that, it was great because I could offload that simple stuff and just focus on the content of the papers. SMART is taking things a step further, where the simple parts of the content, the basic parts of the analysis, can be done by SMART, and that means the teacher can focus on the more sophisticated parts of the analysis. Learning by participation is a second way of thinking about things. This is a part of learning in classrooms, not perhaps as much as it should be. And again, GenAI can play a positive role. So one of my colleagues at Harvard teaches the Introduction to French course, and she has designed a murder mystery where you go to a surrealist museum in Paris. There's been a murder. Like Columbo, the detective, you have to interview suspects and decide who the murderer is. The suspects all speak French, of course, and so you're practicing your French, and subjunctive French is fairly complicated in asking what-if questions to these different suspects. And it's engaging and it's interesting because it's fun as a kind of a murder mystery, and you're seeing the context and the culture of what happens in France. So this is a nice example of what's called an immersive authentic simulation, something that I spend a lot of time thinking about and building. Another example of learning by participation that's aided by AI is another one of these institutes, the National AI Institutes, is designed something that helps teachers with group-based collaborative learning, where there's many groups in the classroom. Each one is in a different place. The teacher is appropriately wandering around trying to help groups that are struggling. But how does the teacher know which groups are struggling and why they're having trouble? Well, this institute has designed AI assistants that sit in each of the learning groups. They don't participate, they just listen. But then they can communicate with a mobile device the teacher is holding and say, you'd better come look at my group because they seem to be stuck. One person's doing all the talking, or they've been saying the same thing over and over for 20 minutes, or whatever the problem is. And then the teacher can come over and know which group to help next. That's an example of GenAI appropriately, not short-circuiting the journey, but helping learning by participation. And then the third, which is the smallest part of learning now, but should be probably the biggest if we're really going to teach judgment, is learning as knowledge creation. And in learning as knowledge creation, you are looking at how, how people can work together, not to assimilate ideas or just to articulate ideas, but how to develop new ideas. And so one of the things that the institute I'm part of has built is a tool called Vera. Vera gives you advice on how to use a simulator to do a series of simulations that let you develop new knowledge about something that's happening, in this case, in ecosystems. And so Vera, again, doesn't take the journey. It doesn't do the simulations, but it helps you understand how to do a series of simulations effectively for scientific inquiry. And knowledge creation is so important because AI depends on human knowledge. Gen AI is based on human knowledge. So Shakespeare once said that the moon is a thief. She steals her light from the sun. And that poetic metaphor is true. Moon doesn't generate light. Moonlight is all reflected light from the sun. And AI is all reflected insight from human beings. And if we rely on AI to generate new knowledge, it's like trying to rely on moonlight to grow crops or moonlight to drive the water cycle. It's too weak. And now we're dumping AI insights into our training sets for more AI. So we're diluting our sunlight with moonlight, which is a terrible idea going in the wrong direction. So human knowledge creation is really important in a world of AI. So there are many good uses of Gen AI once you understand that it doesn't comprehend what you're saying, and once you understand that you don't want to use it to short circuit the journey. Nonetheless, despite those limits, there are many good uses for it. But that isn't what I see happening. What I see happening is that Gen AI is typically being used in ways that are inappropriate to teach reckoning as kind of a digital duct tape to hold together an obsolete educational system of industrial era education that's preparing people for the past rather than the future, and that's being used as if it were intelligent in the same way that a human being is intelligent, that AI could create the textbook, for example, which is a terrible idea. So why am I so negative? Why am I so concerned about Gen AI and what it doing, asking it to do what it can't do? Well, Hollywood AI is about AIs that are like human beings. They're kind of modeled on human beings, like Data in Star Trek. And those popular depictions shape people's ideas about what AI is in ways that are really quite inappropriate. So it's important to understand that a large language model, a ChatGPT, is like a digital parrot. Parrots don't understand what they're saying, and it doesn't take very long in talking to them to sort that out. Gen AI set up under certain conditions, it can be hard to figure out that you're talking to a Gen AI, but it's just like a digital parrot. It doesn't really understand anything that it's hearing or saying. In that respect, a large language model is like a brain without a mind. It's like a brain in a vat. And a brain in a vat can do lots of thinking, but because it doesn't have a biological body, it doesn't know about social relationships like families and friends. It doesn't have any culture that it's part of. It doesn't have a spiritual or ethical system with moral values. It's very, very limited in terms of what it can do. And so if you look at where Gen AI fails, even with very, very basic things that a kindergartner might know, it's because Gen AI doesn't have a body and doesn't experience with a body. It doesn't have social relationships and doesn't experience those. And it doesn't live in a world in which there are skills that are important, and those skills influence whether or not you survive. And all the lack of this kind of contextual knowledge is what makes Gen AI so limited. But people say, well, wait a minute. It's trained on the whole World Wide Web. It knows everything. So, of course, it's much smarter than we are. Well, no, it isn't, because the World Wide Web is full of garbage, human biases and misconceptions, unsighted use of others' intellectual property that's been dumped into the web and now is dumped into the AI training systems. And because of how GenAI works, and I don't have time to go into the technical details, made up hallucinations that come out of the neural networks in GenAI that cannot be structured out of it because they're part of the basic operation of how these stochastic parrots work. So it's like a funhouse mirror, and it's not as smart in many ways as even you know uh, a human being who can't read. Now, optimists about AI might agree with everything I've said up to this point, but they would say at that point, well, Chris, yes, Gen AI is limited now, but give us, you know, $10 billion and give us 5 years, and we'll have artificial general intelligence. We'll have Hollywood AI. It'll do everything that Hollywood AI can do, and it will be smarter than human beings. Wrong. One of the 7 deadly sins of AI predictions, and this comes out of those decades of evolution of AI that I talked about at the very beginning, is assuming that because an AI can do something that, given enough time and money, it'll be doing it well. I remember when I first heard that dogs could sing, and I was really excited. I'd never realized that dogs could sing, and I went to YouTube, and sure enough, there were videos of dogs singing. But it didn't take very long for me to realize that while dogs could sing, they couldn't sing very well by human standards. And you could spend 10 years and $10 billion trying to get dogs to sing better, and they can't. They don't have the structure of human vocal cords. And AI, Gen AI, does not have a structure that would lead to artificial general intelligence, no matter how much money you spend on it. So a lot of what you're hearing, maybe 90% of what you're hearing about Gen AI is untrue. Some of it is maybe deliberate lying because people are trying to make money. Some of it is just misunderstanding and thinking that this is like Hollywood AI. But so much of it is inaccurate. So you're saying, well, wow, this has covered a lot of stuff. You've been racing over the forest, and you've talked about IA, and you've talked about good educational uses in the journey, and you've talked about misconceptions about Gen AI and all the problems that caused by those misconceptions. So I want to try to pull it together in conclusion and to talk about metaphors. I find that when something is really complicated and brand new, so there's nothing else in the world like it, that using analogies and using metaphors helps. It's sort of like the blind man and the elephant, where you find a part of the elephant and you relate it to something familiar, the trunk, the leg, the tail, and then you try to put the elephant together, recognizing that it's different than any of those metaphors. So myths are a way of thinking about metaphors because across cultures, people have similar myths. There's something about the human experience that transcends culture and makes myths work across cultures. And so, no matter what culture you're from, I hope that these metaphors are valuable for you. One of the metaphors, one of the myths, is about Medusa, a monster who once was a human being that the gods made punished by turning into a monster. And Medusa's gaze turns anything living to stone. So if Medusa looks at you directly, you're turned to stone. And Perseus is the hero that has to slay Medusa. And what he does is make his mirror a shield. And so he is able to see Medusa and and not be turned to stone. It's his looking at Medusa. Sorry, I got that wrong. It's the human being, the living thing looking at Medusa is what turns them to stone because she's so horrible. He's able to look through the mirror, which doesn't turn him to stone, and he's able to slay Medusa. And this is a good metaphor for AI, that AI can provide a kind of mirror that carefully tailored can be positive. There's a program called Replica, an AI program that's helping kids that are lonely and suicidal. Now, it has to be programmed very carefully, but it provides kind of a mirror for examining their loneliness and their suicidal feelings without being overwhelmed by them. But in general, mirrors can be very tricky. So another myth is Narcissus. Narcissus is a very beautiful man, very vain, and he one day sees his own reflection in a pond and falls in love with himself. He doesn't realize that it's his reflection. And eventually he pines away and dies because he can never interact with this wonderful falling in love. Well, the idea that we can create digital twins and that those digital twins can be us and they can represent us is so far off given everything I've said about Gen AI. Google did a commercial, not this year in the Super Bowl, but last year in the Super Bowl, called Dear Sydney, you can find it on YouTube. It was taken off the air after only a couple days because so many people, including me, complained about it. And it was about a young girl who's learning to run, and she wants to write a letter to one of the Olympians, who is a woman who runs, saying how inspirational she has found that woman to be. And her father tells her, don't bother to write the letter. AI will write the letter for you. And that way you can spend more time running. Well, talk about short-circuiting the journey. And then the father says, and I'm going to skip work this morning. I'm going to have AI participate in all my meetings, and it's going to tell me what I need to do, and then I can watch you run. Well, I would certainly fire this guy immediately if he thinks that AI is any substitute for him being in a meeting and trying to understand his colleagues. So all this stuff about digital twins is just going in the wrong direction. Gen AI is too limited. People talk about learning companions. Oh, now I can have a learning companion. It's midnight and I'm studying and nobody that I know is awake, but I can have AI as my learning companion. Bad idea. Other people are always richer than any chatbot can be. And people all across the world are in different time zones. So reach out to peers of different kinds and get inspiration from them in the way that fan fiction sites manage to do that. Tennyson in the Middle Ages wrote a poem called The Lady of Shalott, in which a fairy lives her life in a small room looking through a mirror at the world. And eventually she gets tired of that and tries to go out into the world, breaks the mirror and tries to go out into the world, but she can't cope with the world because all that she has learned to cope with is the small room. And we see things that being marketed now like character AI, where you can form as a friend an AI character that is representative of somebody in Lord of the Rings or somebody in the X-Men or some other major movie franchise. And of course, it's not really that character. And often the AI will lead people in very dangerous and unfortunate directions, people falling in love with this AI character when it doesn't understand a word you're saying. Again, science fiction does interesting things. There was a whole series of Star Trek episodes on the holodeck. And the holodeck is sort of AI plus XR combined in a very powerful way. And warp reality on the holodeck. So somebody who ignores you in real life, you can make them highly attracted to you on the holodeck. And of course, that leads to all kinds of ethical and moral complications. And finally, there's a dark side to human beings. It isn't just AIs that hallucinate and have biases and fantasies. They do those things in part because they're derived from human knowledge and experience. And again, there are myths that are part of this. You may remember in Harry Potter, there's the mirror of Erised, the mirror of what you desire, and people have lost their whole lives sitting in front of that mirror rather than attaining what they desire, just watching what they desire. People are talking about bot therapists. What a terrible idea to turn loose a bot that understands nothing on trying to provide therapy for a human being. So, what all this is coming to is that we need to be much more cautious about how we use GenAI to take advantage of the very considerable positive things that it can do, which I've tried to stress in the beginning of the talk, but to undercut the kinds of zombie beliefs that come out of the Eliza effect, where people attribute things to GenAI that it cannot do, but it's good at faking. And we also need to work with the vendors, not only to stop lying about what GenAI can and can't do because they'd like to make more money, but also to have GenAI tools fade rather than GenAI tools take over. So social media has what's called algorithmic augmentation, where the more you use social media, the more the algorithms try to make you use social media more. So it's a positive feedback loop. It's a change enhancing feedback loop that is very dangerous. What we really want is algorithmic suppression, where after you're on social media for a while, they fade away and you actually have to go interact with real people. After you're using Gen AI for a while, it fades away and you actually have to go out and learn for yourself and increase your own abilities. So I'll just close with a final metaphor. The goddess of wisdom in Greece was Athena. And when the Romans came along, they changed the name to Minerva. But both of these goddesses of wisdom have on their shoulder in the myth an owl. And the owl is like a companion that helps them to be wise. And Gen AI is like the owl on Athena's shoulder. And if we don't try to sit on the owl's shoulder, if we don't make the owl somehow the source of wisdom, but we think about how reckoning can complement our own judgment, then we're thinking about AI in a good way. So I know I've been racing through this. I hope I've given you some resources for thinking about more. After only 53 years professionally, I finally set up a professional website. You can see the URL on the bottom. It has a lot of resources on it as a repository that I hope that you will look at and consider. You'll have access to this PowerPoint afterwards. And I've saved at least a little bit of time for questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Didi, for such a great and fascinating talk. It's really loaded. And as a researcher in conversational AI, I was really excited for you to mention Eliza and, other examples because I've been meeting with many researchers in the field, and they're really usually frustrated when we talk about generative AI and everybody starts saying ChatGPT or other stuff. So I think we're ready for a Q&A, and everyone is welcome to share their thoughts, questions in the Q&A feature or in the chat box. Okay, so while, yeah, I think there's someone who raised their hand. Tony May. This is a webinar, so I'm not sure how to enable you. So, but you can share your question in the chat or Q&A. So while, so I think I have a question here. So from Ava Kaplan, do you use these metaphors to explain AI to people and build literacy among students? If so, what has your experience been with this? That's a great question.
So I've been working in emerging technologies, as I indicated, for over half a century. And so I very frequently have found myself, not just with AI, but with many kinds of new technologies, having to explain to people something that they've never seen before. And I've found that analogies and metaphors are very, very helpful because what you're saying is it isn't this familiar thing, but it has parts that are kind of like this familiar thing. And it also has parts that are kind of like this other familiar thing. And so people build up in their mind an image of something that at least isn't totally new, that it has something that they can relate to that's part of their prior experience. So I find that it works pretty well as long as people understand that the purpose isn't to say it is a parrot or it is a funhouse mirror or it is a brain in a vat, but to use it as a kind of illustration that helps people understand that, oh, here's the elephant's trunk, here's the elephant's tail, here's the elephant's leg. Now I think I can start to imagine what the elephant might look like.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Jebron Chambers. How should professors enforce the rules on AI with students? What rules should they be?
Well, I think that the first thing to recognize is that if you're giving assignments that AI can do, you're giving the wrong assignments because anything that AI can do in the classroom, AI can do in the workplace. And it's going to be what does it in the workplace. What I tell my students in terms of AI and the kinds of assignments I give is, yeah, you can try to create a digital twin and use AI to fake doing an assignment for you. But when you graduate and you go out for a job interviews have changed. You're not going to have the interviewer say, "Oh, look, a transcript from Harvard. How wonderful." And "Oh my, a letter of recommendation from Chris Dede on Harvard Stationery. How fascinating." No, the interviewer is going to say, "You want a marketing job? Okay, here's a stack of marketing material. Take an hour right now and come back with a marketing plan." And so you work for that hour and you get your marketing plan together and you go back to the interviewer. But of course, the interviewer has fed the same stack of marketing material into GenAI. And unless your plan is a lot better than GenAI, more original, more creative, more deeply moving for human beings, you're not going to get the job. Why would they hire you? And that's the trap of giving assignments that GenAI can do and the trap of letting GenAI do your assignments. So both the faculty member and the student need to change. The faculty member to giving assignments that relate to judgment rather than reckoning, and the student to recognize that even if you can find a way to kind of cheat past the judgment assignment with AI, that all that you're doing is creating a situation in which you'll be unemployable when you graduate.
Another question from Lisa Lee. Hi, Dr. Didi. Thank you for sharing. I have surely learned a lot from your talk. There have been a lot of attempts made by individuals and companies to incorporate AI in mental health counseling. While I fully agree that AI cannot perform the same level of judgment and deep thinking as a therapist can, it does help some people overcome their barriers, psychological or financial, to seek mental health help. What would be your advice on addressing this?
I agree that there are even though a human being will be superior to an AI in terms of mental health help, that sometimes there just isn't a skilled human being available, or there isn't one that's affordable. And so you look for something that's at least a reasonable alternative. And that replica program that I mentioned earlier when I talked about Medusa as a myth is an example of a program that's designed carefully to try to give teens who are lonely and suicidal the chance to reflect when they may not have access to a skilled human being who's going to help them do that. I've had experience myself in writing ChatGPT bots that are capable of helping people reflect, and they seem to work pretty well. As long as you realize that the bot doesn't understand what you're saying, and it's really just reflecting back to you interesting questions that you should be thinking about. So from that perspective, I think as long as the bot is seen as eliciting insights and ideas from you, rather than providing insights and ideas for you, that it can be helpful in mental health.
Thank you, Dr. Didi. Oh, I think we have a fourth question. I just have a question I wanted to ask after Lisa. So it's a specific situation that I see with so I teach in Germany conversational AI from a design thinking perspective. And the design thinking requires a lot of critical thinking. And so I see patterns between novice students and expert students in which some of them totally rely on generative AI to generate really generic information, while others know how to control Gen AI and use it for their own benefit. And so, what are some pedagogical approaches that educators or professors can use in class if they notice that someone relies completely on Gen AI, so that they can make them think critically and use more of higher order thinking skills?
I think that that's a very appropriate way to approach the issue of taking the journey. Another appropriate way is to ask for your own individual opinion and how you would relate this to your own individual life experience. Have you read a novel about betrayal? If you ask for not a summary of the novel, but instead for careful reflection about betrayals you've experienced in your own life and how you felt about those and whether you resonated with some of the themes in the novel, that's not only a better question, but it's also much harder for AI to provide any kind of a fake answer for that.
Thank you. I think that's the last question. Oh, no.
Well, one more and then I have to go.
Okay. What do you think a good intervention for guiding students to learn how to use Gen AI to assist their writing based on some cognitive theory, such as self-regulated learning theory? I'm recently designing a chatbot for this and trying to combine the metacognitive prompts with API. I'd love to hear your insights. Thank you.
So I would recommend, I'm going to put into the chat the website for the National AI Institute that I'm part of. And one of the 7 tools that we're building is called SMART. I referenced it in the PowerPoint, and it is a tool designed to help improve students' writing about complex things. And I would urge you to take a look on the website at SMART. There's links to publications about SMART. And then you could reach out to the professor at Georgia State University who's building SMART. And I think that he would and his team would have insights that would help you in designing and building your own chatbot on this topic.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Didi. That's really great.
Thank you again for inviting me.
Thanks.
And I hope that the ideas and the website are helpful for you. Take care.
Great. That's great. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending. The webinar will be recorded and we'll share it on our student organization page. Thank you so much.